Welcome to today's Corporate Venturing Insider series. Today, I'm so excited to have Patricia Kroondijk from Canon Marketing Japan to join us. Patricia, welcome.
Thanks, Nicolas. What a pleasure to be here.
So, Patricia, I always like to start with this question of how did you get into corporate venturing? What was your journey?
Yeah, I can elaborate a little bit on that. And I have to say, a lot of it was also luck. So I did about 15 years of consulting, actually, strategy consulting for one of the big four. My specialty was very much finance for CFOs in financial services. So it was hardcore banking, insurance, and then the financial side of that. And I did a lot of strategy work for the banks and insurance companies as well, mostly in Europe, actually. And then we decided to move to Silicon Valley. When I landed there, I had no job. There was no financial headquarters, but there was a lot of tech. And so that's when I actually rolled into fintech, insurtech for a Japanese company who hired me for my knowledge of the financial processes, the financial side of building business cases, strategic side of looking into the future and deciding where could we take some of these initiatives. And they hired me into an innovation unit, which was 100% data scientists, engineers. And so I was the one there to open up more on the, I would say, everything non-product side landed on my desk. And that is about 10 years ago. And that's how I started into the corporate venturing world. And from that role, I saw pretty much everything you can put under corporate venturing because it was a very large organization. So we can talk more about that later. But that was my starting point.
Very nice. Well, actually, let's start with corporate venturing. What are the different pillars you've worked in? And then I can double click on each of them.
Yeah, sure. So where I started was at the time it was called an open innovation lab, and it was a mix between finding the right use cases for technologies and then also working with corporate customers to apply those use cases. And we also did a lot of future insights and foresight work. I worked for and still work for a different Japanese company now, but Japanese culture really likes to look 10, 15 years out, call it kizashi, the foresight element. So that's where I started. Then I did some, I would say, deal flow sourcing for the initial stages of the corporate venture fund that we were launching and supported on the corporate venture investment side. Then was asked to build the venture studio, which is venture building. So did that for about 5 years and then transitioned from fintech into climate tech. So moved into that area. And then, yeah, of course, venture clienting sort of throughout the whole road that I've been taken now. I've looked at also M&A, small M&As like between 100 and 200 million. But we always passed on the deal, so haven't completed the full trajectory. Yeah.
Although it takes courage when you've done all the work to decide not to do it.
Yes, but that's also part of the game, I think, knowing when to stop, especially in corporates and especially in Japanese culture where it's not so common to stop a project. It's not very favorable to say no in the end. But I think, yeah, I always, that comes from my consulting days, which I had to be very objective. I had to be coming as almost like as someone who gives the recommendation and you have to stand behind that recommendation. And so, yeah, I would never give off a recommendation that I would not feel comfortable with.
Well, we need to talk about Japanese culture because you worked in 3 Japanese companies. And of course, TDK Ventures. TDK is a Japanese company. So you talked about how difficult it is to say no. And open innovation, I would argue strategies about deciding what you don't do. So you need to explore. M&A is also about deciding to say no. So how do you, what's been your experience across 3 different Japanese companies about this saying no and having that discipline while trying to explore?
Yeah. So actually, officially it's only two, but I work for Hitachi North America and Hitachi Europe. So it's almost like two different legal entities. And now for Canon, it's a very different company. So let's say the reason to say no is very important, and you need to show that you've done your homework in
Mm.
order to say no. And so it cannot be based on a hunch or a feeling or intuition, although it's important, and I think it will guide you. Because I'm a big believer, by the way, also in intuition in some of these decisions and strategies that people are working on in corporate venturing. But for a Japanese company, often we start quite broad, but we do get the time to explore. I was impressed how much still time I would get to do an assessment, to talk to the market. And so I think that's very important, because in the end, then the questions that you get as to why it is no are very detailed, and it can come from an executive, very, very senior, and he goes all the way down to one or two details. And so I think that preparation, that analysis, that depth is really, really important. And the other thing is that it should not be only your team that has done the analysis. You need to talk outside or inside to other units, like really gather sort of a diverse palette of voices. And and hopefully also maybe some bigger logos of other companies, or at least, some reputable, very reputable sources and names. And then it doesn't matter if it's five interviews of very senior people. That counts. That counts very, very much. As much as spending 300,000 on a very, very deep market study. So I think you need to balance those types of inputs. And then the presentation in Japanese, and I mean, maybe this is a lot of detail, but they love details as well. So you need to present everything that you've done, of course, still in a readable manner, but usually the slides are very packed. The decks are very long, big appendices. Like, it's not just a few pictures and the headlines.
Mm.
That's not enough. They won't buy you for what you've done then in your words, even if everything else is in the appendix. They want to see it up front.
It sounds very similar to TDK Ventures. So we have 3 corporate officers in our investment committee. We need 2 votes yes to proceed with an investment, but they really read the investment proposal in advance. We give them 48 hours and they really go through the deck into the details, and their questions are always super sharp. So
Yeah.
definitively resonate. So I need to ask, because clearly you're a numbers person and even fintech was your way in.
Mhm.
But let's talk about intuition. So tell me more about this apparent duality.
Yes, it is a duality indeed. Well, I like to back up the intuition with numbers, but I do feel that, and I've read, even there's academic papers on this topic of how intuition can be used in corporate venturing and how it is very valuable. But I always say it's intuition. It doesn't have to be your intuition. It can be the intuition from the market.
Mm.
And I think that if you marry that of what you see happening and what your hunch or what your kind of your a few pointers are, and you match that, and you talk and you go out and you speak with people in the market, with experts, or with users who you might be targeting, but anything outside of yourself, and you match those two, I think you can have a very, very strong sort of point of view, whether it's intuition or point of view, or and then of course it's always the numbers that count. I mean, in business, it's about revenue, cash flow, profits, profit margin. So in the end, you cannot get around or just propose something based on intuition. You need to back it with numbers. So I think the combination of those two, intuition and numbers, is very, very powerful. If you can get that story right, I think you have a great case to present, whether it's an investment or a new project to do venture building, or setting up a new fund. Those are all big investment decisions.
So, I mean, for the audience who are thinking about corporate venturing, it's tough to talk about intuition when they haven't done it yet. But how do you get confidence over time? And how do you present even when you, because when you base on numbers, it's fairly straightforward to be confident. But when it's on your intuition, and even if you back it with number, how do you present it? Do you have any tips?
It's a really good question. So I have a checklist, and so there's things I typically like go through. It can be even news articles, just to get like a sentiment of what's happening in the EV space, or what's actually the infrastructure that's necessary behind some of these ideas. So you don't only focus on whatever the concept is you're thinking of, but you go a bit broader, like for EVs, what's necessary, for AI, what's necessary, and you end up also on the maybe the less sexy side of things, but it's the hardcore like infrastructure that counts, and how can you realize these things. I look at policy, what are people talking about in Brussels, or how are views in the US, or if we look at Japan, of course, what's happening on that side, because it can be a tailwind or a headwind.
Mhm.
So I try to take, and most people would have done that in their MBAs, these typical like pestle analysis or things like that. But I would go a little bit deeper as well. I try to find interviews with people in the industry, listen, like what are they thinking, where things are going, and so you really you try to collect as many signals as you can, and then the presentation side is that once you have some signals, you can try to derive some numbers. It doesn't have to be exact, and it doesn't have to be 100% right either. It has to tell and back up your story. And when there's no numbers, that's also okay. It's like, this is what I heard from an expert, or this is a group of, this is the EV association, and they view the world like that. So I think it's also the quantitative and the qualitative side. It's a fine balance, and I usually keep, even though I come from the number, I like numbers, I come from the number side. They always should be there, but I think the qualitative story, and then linking it, the most critical part, when you go outside and you collect all these signals and you see what's happening, to link that back to your own corporate. So what can company X doing this? What's the picture that I can paint for my company that sounds interesting? Like, do we want to? And what's the sentiment inside the company as well? Like, do we even want to go in on the EV side, or do we just want to stay on the energy side? Or there must be some sentiments of the folks in the board and your own executives. And so I think matching that back, and that's why I often say, when you do corporate venturing, you don't look just for product market fit, you look for product market corporate fit, which is a third element, and sort of this triangle that you're trying to match up. So I think that's the full complete story that I think would have to be painted. Yeah.
I feel like there is a golden nugget. Tell me more about this corporate fit and how you assess it.
So the corporate fit is really the appetite of the corporate that you work for, and where they would like to grow into the future. So, because corporate venturing is all about new markets, new products, or whatever your matrix is that you want to expand into. Of course, if you do pure investments and you look purely for the financial return, you might not have to match it as strongly as I'm explaining now to the corporate, because yeah, if you find a great startup, it will get you a return that you're satisfied with. There needs to be no match. But most of the corporate venturing folks, I know they have some sort of strategic angle that they need to pursue. And the match is really, it's very subtle, because it's often it can even be personal views of your executives. Like I know someone who I worked for, and he was like, I don't like smart cities. And there was no, there was no financial backups. There was no analysis on why not. But if that's the case, just accept it and then move on. So I was not going to propose any smart city venture building concepts because it would just not fly, no matter how great it would be. And so I think uncovering these types of passions, preferences, because this kind of world moves very fast. So one year they love one topic, and 2 months later it's another topic. So you need to have quite regular dialogues to see where things are going. And then the other key point for us was also that was successful was when we would go really to the revenue responsible. So not only at the top, but at the business unit level, what are their customers asking for? What kind of revenue targets do they have? Is this type of project interesting to slide into their portfolio? Because actually they can maybe get more interesting projects, increase revenue. And so the dialogue between whoever is the commercially responsible people, that is incredibly important to even get pointers. And it doesn't have to be exact if they ask for one feature, because we're not building features, right? We're building companies in the end.
Yeah.
But if you can build onto those features or build a portfolio of features, I think that gets really interesting. And so that guidance is really important. And that often takes, what I've seen is that it's very valuable to stay in a company for quite a few years. And so it's very valuable if you come from a sales organization or the finance organization, because you have such a broad network of people. You can, just call up someone and say, hey, we're thinking of this, or what's your feedback on that? And so your internal network and your reputation is really important in those types of discussions and outreach. Yeah.
So it reminds me of the LinkedIn post you posted, and I think you illustrated it well. And I think it touched on the level of maturity. I think you wrote something about if there's a project you really, really want to push, but no one wants it, move on. And I thought that was really good, because most people feel like they have to keep pushing until the corporation will agree. But actually, there is no point to that. You have to listen to what the corporation wants and be in tune with that. And I thought the way you framed it, which is move on, was really, really good.
Yes, and that's exactly true, because I've seen, and I love it when people are very passionate and they want to push things, but I've seen them burn out completely because it was just not what the organization wanted. It was, asset heavy, and they wanted asset light, or they didn't want to do consulting because it's very resource intensive and hard to scale. But, this was required consulting. And so it either sometimes it's a topic, sometimes it's the type of business model, sometimes it's the type of market. So it varies. But yeah, just move on, because I think the time wasted on those types of niches, you could have spent on something maybe that would fly. So I always like to look, and maybe it's not because I'm lazy, but I like to look for the path of least resistance that still, gives impact wherever you want the impact to be, whether it's environmental, social, or financial. But I think that is just, for everyone, a just smarter move. And sometimes I had it when we were just building the venture studio. I was working for the CEO of Hitachi America, and we were proposing some bold ventures and ideas. And then he actually told us, he said, we have no reputation inside the company to even be proposing this. We have not even earned the right to give this or to propose this to the company and to invest in us. So let's earn that right first. And that was, a few much simpler, closer to the core ventures, prove that we can do it. And so, it's also this trust building with your stakeholders. That was, he sort of said, just move on, because we have no right to not earn the right to do any of this stuff. So fair enough.
I think the way I would even frame it is a person telling you, for example, they don't want smart city. That's a gift. They are
Yeah,
giving you the most beautiful signal that you don't need to spend any time on smart city, and you're saving hundreds of hours for you and your team not to work on something that would not lead anywhere. So it's like a gift. And I think the path of least resistance for me, I always think that very powerful rivers have been created by following the path of lowest resistance.
Hmm.
And so if you want to go somewhere where it's going to be full strategic, full speed, full corporations follow, that's because they felt that there was something, like you say, corporate fit with whatever you're proposing.
Yeah, exactly. I couldn't agree more.
Okay. Now let's go back in time. So the Open Innovation Lab, can you share maybe something you learned from that time which you are still using today?
So let me think. Well, so there was one. So we were in Silicon Valley at the time, was 2015, 2016, and it was all about blockchain at the time. It has probably already been for a few years, and it was a big hype. And there was written a lot of investments and things like that were happening. And so there was two things I learned in that Open Innovation Lab. One thing is that when there's one hype going on, there's always a counter hype, something the complete opposite happening at the same time. So either it's, everyone wants to have open and transparent, but then on the other hand, everyone, there's a big group of people or corporates that want to have more closed, more discreet. So there was this very interesting combination of sort of vibes going on in terms of what the banks and insurance companies were really looking for. So I always remember that now when I see big hype, I'm thinking, there is a counter hype somewhere else. And what is that? What is that counter hype? And what is that telling us? So
That's a
that's what
golden nugget, looking for the counter hype.
the counter hype. Yeah, exactly. Like we have these huge data centers, right, going on right now. But I know there's also edge data centers. I know there's small stuff happening.
Yeah.
There's a lot of large language models, but I know there's small language models as well. So yeah, I use it still in anything I look at in big trends. And then the other thing is it was very much more concrete. So we had this blockchain developers, and then we were working with a bank in Singapore to implement it as a use case, and it was like approving trades or something like that. And so we went to the IT department, and we said, like, spin up 3 blockchain nodes for us, and they looked at us like, what are you telling us? Tell us you want an Oracle database, or tell us you want Hyperion, something. But spinning up any new tech in these organizations is extremely, extremely difficult. And so I learned from that going sometimes directly into the org is maybe not the best way. If you can have some sort of test environment, sandbox, anything outside to prove the value, because you don't necessarily have to be inside the organization to prove the value. This was process reengineering, so we had to just show that a certain process was working. But if it was a dummy process or real process, it didn't really matter in the end. So I learned also that you don't have to always go directly inside. Even implementing it somewhere else in a sandbox, or even in an environment of someone else, not even of the bank, was way more useful than trying to motivate the IT department to start to spin up blockchain nodes. No. So that was the other learning I had there.
It's a good one. And I think it speaks to the decision on timing when to introduce something inside the corporation. And you may have invested in a startup, but it's way too early to introduce, and you just wait for the right time for that intersection of interest, which I guess is part of the corporate fit. And I think that timing is one of the most important decisions you can make. And if you have an ability, like you mentioned, of a sandbox, to get it to a level where it's less fragile and more demonstrable, you're more likely to get the interest. And if you show it too early and it gets shut down just for fragility versus intent.
Absolutely. Yeah. Even now, we have the company I work for now, we're even interested to sponsor proof of concepts for startups that did find a corporate to work with, but it's not our corporate. But we are just willing to invest a little bit to observe on how it goes. So another corporate is our sandbox in that respect, and so we're very interested to observe outside of our own organization first. Yeah.
Okay. Now, I don't want to anchor too much on the sandbox, but I think you talked about doing venture building. Can you share also what you learned during the venture building exercise that you still use today?
Hmm. Oh, I learned so much in the venture building side. Um, but I think, and we talked about it a little bit already before. Um, we it was interesting. We did a project with another corporate, so we did venture building with two corporates because we wanted to spread the risk, and so we created this quite complicated partnership. It was an insurance company. We were a tech company. So it was quite interesting approach. And then we ran this venture building exercise. And we were actually thinking that could be a model for us to share risks in the future. And so we would venture build with other corporates. But actually, in the end, the agendas were so different. And they saw a market, we didn't see a market. There was all sorts of complications in what if things go wrong, who would be on the hook? That was pretty much the main question once we figured out that there was a market and a business model and all of that. And so the difference in agendas and the number of agendas at the table was just too large. And so I took that also as a learning point, and I still use it today, where I don't want too many business units, even if it's internal, at the table at the beginning. I don't want too many startups at the table too early either, and so that you can keep kind of a fairly close agenda, very focused as well, like what we discussed earlier. Focus is so important. And then you can start to expand. So the venture building I do now, often we do need startups because we have no internal R&D or any IP inside the company to build from. But we keep it very contained, maybe one or two maximum when we do our venture building. We don't take any external corporate partners from the beginning. That's only after we've proven a bunch of things. And so, yeah, that was a big learning point, that too many people at the table from the beginning, whether it's internal or external, just slows you down so much. Then it's, it was a bit.
Nearly counterintuitive, right? Which is, it's better to go slow with fewer people so you can actually go faster.
Yes. Also, there's a fine balance between the speed. Slow is sometimes good, like you said. It's not. It's good to test. It's good to try things. But even to do that, I rather have a smaller team. And also, like the stakeholder management is just so much more massive, with so many more business units and reporting lines, and who's going to pay for what, and all of these questions. It gets so much more complicated, and then I think you lose speed. That's a waste. If you lose it on those types of things. If you lose speed because you're running an extra POC, and because you want to test out another use case, I think that's valuable.
Okay.
Yeah, reduction of speed. Yeah.
Now, you mentioned small team. What is for you the best size for venture building team?
Ooh, so it really depends, I find, but I've done it very scrappy to people, but that was, very, very scrappy. I think somewhere between, it depends on your ambitions. But I would say for me, I like to work with about 4 or 5, could even be 3. I like to outsource things as well, so it doesn't always have to be done with 100% internal people. I think if you have 3 or 4 very experienced people, very diverse, then I think with some external help, you can get really really far. That's just for the first phases, right? And then it scales up. But yeah, to kick it off, I would say somewhere between 3 and 5. I know it's small. I know sometimes people like to have much larger teams, but I find with that type of team, you can do so much.
I think the learning loops are way faster.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Because it's better. I find always, in my past, to have people dedicated to these kinds of projects, or maybe run 2, then to be split over many, and you get zero point 0.2 FTE from that person. And also, if you're listening and you're more junior, I would try to negotiate like a full-time stint on some of these types of projects, because you just learn so much more than being split over multiple ones. When you're more junior, it's very hard, I find.
Now, what came across is also when you assemble the team, you're very, very careful about who joins the team. Do you have any tips or best practices about how you assemble the teams?
Mm, So I never had the luxury I could really choose. So I just had to make do with whoever was there, because we had small teams. So um, I have to say, we didn't put a whole lot of thought into some of the teams that were established. What I do really like, where I am now, one principle that is being used is the question being asked, what are you passionate about? If you're passionate about water or inclusion or energy, and so you understand also people's passion, because that's when they read the news outside of work or on the way. Like, you get just so much more entrenched in the topic if you have a certain passion about it. So that is something I do really value a lot. Um, and that I ask for, of what people's interests are and passions in terms of topics. But otherwise, yeah, I don't think I've put more sort of analytics behind it. We did that when we were working with an external company. We would do a team assessment of what types we were, if we were a driver or more collaborator, or so we would try to understand more of our own communication and analytical models. But and it helped. I just didn't. After we worked with the external company, we never really had a budget to redo that for everyone, and redo that for every team. So it was just like make it work kind of thing.
I see.
Yeah.
Now, let's talk about Canon Marketing Japan. So first, what the firm is doing, because Canon is clearly a very famous brand, but you're part
Mm.
of this entity, and what it is that you're building.
Yeah, sure. So I always have to specify that I work for Canon Marketing Japan, which is really a mouthful, but it's a subsidiary of Canon Inc. That is the actual headquarters and the main umbrella company. And this is a subsidiary that's 51% owned by Canon Inc., but actually 49% is owned by other shareholders, because it's listed separately on the Tokyo Stock Exchange. It has it's still significant subsidiary, 16,000 people, a few billion in revenues. And this is the arm of Canon that takes care of all of the marketing for Canon's products in Japan. So it's very much a sales and marketing type of DNA that's inside the company. And this is only in Japan, by the way, so not global. And the other thing they have is quite significant business in software. So they do business process engineering, robotic process automation. They have software that they've developed, and on top of that, they have been a channel partner for global tech to be brought into Japan. So they were the ones who brought the Apple computer into Japan, and so they've always been supporting scale ups. I couldn't say startups, sometimes, but mostly like scale ups, established companies as a channel partner into the Japanese market. And so it's an interesting group. The DNA is
Ah,
definitely different than the printers and the cameras and the other like heavy tech, because they do also MRI machines. There's some other real hardware type of businesses in Canon. And a year and a half ago, so quite recent, they decided to do two things. One is to build a fund, and they launched a fund, a venture fund, about $60 million, seed Series A. We've done about 13 investments now, mostly in Japan, but two in Europe. And this is quite a generic fund. So, but they started that journey a year and a half ago, and to do the CVC side, and they have built a venture building team, and it's the same team, where there's about 6 teams and about 15, 20 people now building ventures in each cluster, in these 6 clusters that we have. And they are resilient, so more climate oriented. They're also more, a bit society oriented on inclusion and fairness. We have AI, there's some food and agriculture. So it's quite mixed as
oh,
well. Nothing to do with the printers and the cameras again. So really opening up new markets and new products, mostly in Japan. We're looking at a global strategy, and that's I joined only 9 months ago to represent all the European activities and Middle Eastern activities, both for the fund and for the venture building side.
so there is a design choice which is very interesting, which is to have the venture building and the CVC as one team,
Yes.
which I'm sure create tensions between priorities. Can you speak to that design choice and what that means on a day-to-day for a team like yours?
Yeah, it's very interesting. It's the first time I've really seen this in action as well. Myself, we were very quite separate at Hitachi, I have to say, and that caused a lot of tension that I can also explain. But um, so the choice was really, the idea was that they also didn't want to create a lot of different teams. They didn't want to look also from the corporate and headquarters like, oh, what are they doing? They're building this team and that team, and so they wanted it to be very contained. Like, we're doing this together as one package, to create the new business for 2050 kind of thing. And it is, it's same topics. It is the same vision in the end. It's just different routes, different tools in that sense. So they understood that quite clearly, that that's the difference, and that it can be very beneficial if you are doing deep dives on the CVC side. You pick up points and knowledge that you can also build a venture around. You don't only invest. The other thing is since we have no IP, because all the R&D sits under the Canon Inc. side, we need to utilize some of the startups that we invest in for our venture building. So
Right.
there was clearly from the beginning, we knew we needed that sort of two-way, communication and sharing of knowledge, and that's why the team is in the same group. And there's even people who are in the CVC and in the venture building side. And that's very, very interesting because, yeah, often when we're venture building, we're like, oh, well, we actually need a startup. How can we do that? And once you venture build, why wouldn't you, with a startup, why wouldn't you invest, right? Because the upside is much bigger if you can grow this company together, and you should take a stake as well. And so I think it makes total sense to do that together. And I think it's been quite successful for now. And we are realizing with some of our investments, some really great expansion for them in Japan, and they fit into the portfolio of the venture building side as well. And I think that's the other big difference that I saw now is that the way we work is by cluster. So we'll have a theme, let's say resilience, but then there's not. It's like a portfolio of ideas. It's not just one venture we are building. We are building a portfolio where we're matching the startups in. We're matching in what kind of ventures we want to build, and that becomes like that's like one cluster. And once a cluster is also from a corporate governance perspective, once we have a cluster approved, like resilience, the team has complete freedom to decide what they want to do in that cluster. And
See,
so,
hey, it's like you are able to build or to partner, and by investing in the startups that could help build a total solution.
exactly. So we can partner, we can build ourselves, we can invest. Well, M&A is not really on the radar because we don't have the budgets right now for that. But yeah, then within that cluster, it's like, okay, what do you want to build, and what do you need for that, and it's not just one venture as well. So it's a group of ideas and ventures that gets built. So yeah, it's complex from the beginning. So it took the team quite some time to get things up and running. But now, just as of the last month or so, most of the clusters are approved and it starts to take shape.
Now, let me stress test a little bit that. So you have a cluster like resilience. You're looking at many, many startups who are in that space. Is it that you're going to build what it is that you wish to find, but you cannot find it in the startups? Or do you start building, learn about the space, and then start investing in the startups that are complementary? I'm trying to understand which one is more likely to come first.
Um, we do a bit of simultaneous right now, I have to say. So we have a vision, we have a blueprint, let's say, of what we would like to build. And so, but we also know we don't have anything ourselves. So we fairly quickly go out to our ventures portfolio or startups in the market that are not invested in yet to start to pilot. But also for some of the ideas, we know the Japanese market is challenging and we may need to build something ourselves. And so we would, well, before to invest, we would look at startups. But if it turns out we do a bit of analysis, we get support from expert organizations as well. But when it turns out that, yes, it could be better or to build with this startup or to build with you have these research and R&D organizations, and we build with them. So we do a little bit at the simultaneous, I have to say, to see what works. So it's a lot of trial and error, actually. It's also quite a bit of testing that gets done.
Now, part of the stress testing is also, as you know, you worked with Hitachi. You have a corporate VC, which is firewalled from the corporation. So the entrepreneurs know they can share a lot because the team that might be building the same thing don't know what the CVC is learning. But in this case, you're talking about potentially the same brain, the same people. So how do you handle that?
Yeah, you mean that the startups might not want to share everything because they are, yeah.
In case you decide to build something that they shared with you.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a really good it's a really good question. We haven't, to be honest, so we haven't really encountered that because I don't think we've gone to the point where a startup would be really worried. And of course, we're quite transparent in the sense that we know we don't really have some of the capabilities to do much ourselves, and even though, yeah, well, some things you just don't want to build yourself again, like a battery or something. You just know that
Yeah.
much better to source outside. But I also, what I maybe it's something from the last, I don't know if you've experienced that, but I see a very high interest for many startups to enter the Japanese market. And so actually sometimes I have to slow down the startups and say, oh, we need to get NDA in place before you share this, because they're so keen actually to get a partner to enter the Japanese side of things, to grow there, that it hasn't been really an issue yet, I have to say. Yeah. Yeah.
Now, what it is that in that design you like the most?
Ooh. In the whole design, like the organizational design or
The design. So
yeah.
abstract from the people, abstract from the corporation, really the design. Because the audience would probably be thinking, oh, that's interesting. I've never heard of the same team doing both. And clearly there are some constraints and there are some challenges, but there's also, I'm sure, a level of freedom or a level of speed that you probably love more than anything.
Yeah. Yeah. So, well, the design, the fact that we know we have to go outside is really speeding things up.
Mm.
So, while a POC, let's say a test or POC at my previous company would take anywhere between, I would say, 6 to 12 months. Now I've gotten, within 3 months, I have something signed and we can actually start trying stuff.
And I'm sure you can go even faster.
Yeah, and then we couldn't do faster. Actually, sometimes it's like a stupid thing in the agreement about IP. It's usually about IP or something.
Yeah.
But like a small thing where the legal teams just go like 2 or 3 weeks back and forth or whatever. Like it's usually nothing big that holds it back. So I think we could be much faster. And so I think that's really great, because it just it gives us quickly a view, yes or yay or nay,
Mm.
and we get to know these startups as well. And I think the other design point that I just really like, the cross sharing of, and the activating of the portfolio is it's very, we look at the portfolio, we try many different routes, we're taking startups to conferences, we're introducing them to friendly customers. So we're very dedicated in that sense. But I know other companies are also, they have this really portfolio. I know TDK has a big portfolio support team as well. But I think the speed where we can make some connections, because the venture building team is close to the business and it just flows naturally quite fast, then right to I would say, commercially interesting discussion, because that's ultimately what you want to have for us, is
Yep.
commercially interesting discussions and routes to market. And we want to get, one of our KPIs is the number of POCs as well. So literally the number of POCs is a KPI. And so that makes, the testing quite fast.
I think there's something to do with your mothership, which doesn't have IP, doesn't have R&D. So it's all about value creation, but not you don't have this not invented here reaction that
No.
might happen in other corporations, right? And so you can go full speed into, you define your clusters, you know what it is you want to build, and then you can go as fast as possible to find, which, by the way, I'm sure means that the entrepreneurs you meet get energized because you're finding what it is they are building. If it resonates with your cluster, you can engage very quickly and you know what you both want to achieve.
Absolutely, that's exactly it. And there is, by the way, R&D in the mothership of Canon Inc., but we don't have access to it. So Canon Marketing it's a sales and marketing organization and some software developers. So we can support on the software side and also on the hardware maintenance and things like that. But we have nothing else. And that's actually a good thing, because the not invented here at my previous company was very common, and
Yep.
it was a political minefield a bit.
I can imagine. So how would you, I mean, you talk about your previous company. How would you contrast what you've learned at Hitachi and use it today? Because clearly there are some of the best practices and some of the disciplines that you've learned you use today.
No, absolutely. And so Hitachi, interestingly enough, was much more international in the way they operate. So Canon is much more a Japanese company. So I'm using for sure all the international etiquette, the international network. All of that is what I could bring uh, to Canon now, and that's what they also valued because they have been operating mostly on the Japanese market. So that is one of the big learnings from Hitachi is how do you build a global business, not just one business in even in a European country or something, but from the start, we always had this very global perspective. When we would run validations, we would validate it in North America, in Europe, somewhere in Asia as well. So we would run it from day one as an international initiative. So while Canon is not there, that type of a way of working is of very high interest to them. So that's one huge learning I take away from Hitachi that I bring to, even though it's another Japanese company, but still a very different one. They're not all the same, I would
Yep.
say. And I think then, I mean, the other thing is, I think building the relationships inside is really, really key. And within Hitachi, I had 8 years or 9 years to do that. And I think that is a key learning is to always just keep talking about your projects, keep sort of, if you get the opportunity to present your work, you jump on it, just spread the word, like word of mouth for these types of small groups like corporate venturing or innovation or even strategy is like it's worth gold
Yep.
because that's how I usually then found my internal collaborators and champions and things like that is through that word of mouth. So that is for me now it's very challenging because I'm out of the 16,000 people, I'm one of two outside of Japan.
Yep.
And so
And you're not Japanese.
and I'm not Japanese and I don't speak the language and I live quite far away. So building that up again, that's that's I'm a little bit worried, but I'm optimistic. With several trips and good regular cadence, it's possible virtually. But that I also take away from Hitachi is really this type of internal word of mouth. Um,
And you mentioned the team is about 15 to 20 people. Are they mostly Japanese or you have a mix?
100%, 100%, yeah.
So you're the only exception.
I am in Europe, and I have one colleague in San Francisco.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. So that's it's
And I was
so
going to ask a question about team building.
yeah.
And it's more from the point of view of your design of having the CVC and the venture building in the same team. Because most times when you think about CVC, you're thinking about more external people and some internal. Venture building will be more internal and very few external. How are you thinking about the team
Mm.
building best practice in the making for when it's one team?
So right now, to be fully transparent, this is public knowledge as well. The fund is run by an external VC as a service, but our ideal situation for the future is the fund run internally also, or with a team that is Canon. But we're the only LP, by the way, now. So it's just a VC as a service. And that our venture building team, our ideal setup is actually, I would say it's a networked organization, um, because the topics and the expertise that we sometimes need And the same for CVC, by the way. You need to activate these people, but you might not just need them for 2 months or five chats or 6 months. So we want to build a very solid, like very lean base foundation internal, but then have a networked organization around that we activate when we need the support. We very interested in finding partners that can help with either the deal flow, the testing, building, any type of ventures together with them, even maybe co-managing the next fund is also an ambition of us as well, and then to also balance out Japan versus global resources. But because all of our customers are 100% in Japan right now, that's definitely where the weight is. And so that will for sure in the future also be the biggest team. But we do need to balance it out a little bit.
So I want to double click on the VC as a service, but not from a point of view of what you experience today, but more in terms of what would be the advantage for a corporation that wants to start a CVC to start with a VC as a service, and what they should watch out to decide whether it's a good firm or not a good firm and the right path. So what, abstracting Canon from this, but from your point of view, what would be the things to watch out for?
Yeah. So I would say two things. One is how they will align with your priorities, whether it's cadence, the deal flow, searches. How can they find that corporate fit? How will they go about doing that? Of course, regular deal finding, that's kind of, table stakes. The reputation of the firm is very important. So they can actually find the right deals and get invited to the right tables, let's say. So I think those two are critical.
Okay. Now, this is my last question, but earlier in the interview, you talked about insights and foresights. And I like that. And I think it's actually a golden nugget inside. Can you speak to that?
Yeah. So foresight is, I start with foresight because it's actually projecting yourself or your customers into the future and designing what that new world would look like, and from all angles. So you create really a picture of what does insurance look like in 10 years, or I did a study on what does money look like in 10 years. Is there even still some money? And so that is really a foresight. It's and it doesn't have to hold true, but it's at least a scenario or multiple. It's a range of scenarios that you can use as a foundation to then work backwards from.
Yep.
And say, okay, if you have this world, then we work backwards. Okay, what does it mean for insurance policies, or what does it mean for your pensions, or how do you deal with cash? All of those questions. So that's really, really interesting work. You should be allowed some time for that. So don't, if you only have 2 days, don't go into a huge foresight exercise. It can be very helpful. And then insight is much more on, what's happening inside the customers for me, or what's happening inside the areas where you think you might be able to help, whether, where you think there might be a problem or something there to solve. What's actually happening there is the insight that you need for me to decide, is there something there that you want to invest in or build a venture around, or invest in a startup.
Yeah. At TDK Ventures, we also like to do this. We call it differently, but foresight is basically dreaming different type of futures, and then we backcast from it, and we see what's missing to get to that, and search for the entrepreneurs building something, these gaps. So I think it's very similar, and I think it helps to think about what it is that's missing to get to a different type of future.
Yeah, that for sure. And it helps you to think in portfolio style, because there's never one solution to what the future will look like. And then you can also start plotting, your initiatives and how they fit together, and road mapping and all of that. Yeah.
Wow. Well, Patricia, thank you so much for your time. I think your passion is obvious, and I love the way you deconstruct the design that you experienced in the past and today and share it with the audience. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Nicolas, for inviting me.